So I'll see people who are burning out or who just are starting to recognize that like it's not terribly functional. Like I can't put my phone down and have dinner with my spouse and my kids without feeling that urge to like pick it back up again, because what's happening is their brain is slowing down enough that the warning bell starts to go off of like,
Yes.
oh no, the shields are dropping.
Yes.
Red alert.
Welcome to the Mastering Momentum podcast, where you will learn research-based strategies to create the life you want. I'm Dr. Jan Newman, a former corporate attorney and academic turned clinical psychologist, performance coach, and multipreneur. If you struggle with change, the problem isn't you, it's your process. I'll show you how to leverage psychology and neuroscience to rewire your brain, boost your mindset, transform your relationships, elevate your decision-making, and take your performance to the next level. Let's start building the life you want today.
Hi, Dr. Lyle. Welcome to the show.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Yes, absolutely. So today I'm going to ask you a lot of stuff. I want to start off with asking you a little bit about what you do and who you work with and all of those things. I would be remiss, though, if I did not acknowledge that we have known each other a long time. As long as like my children have been alive is how long.
Mm-hmm. Yes, longer than mine. So yes, absolutely.
Yes. So I thought we would acknowledge that and then kind of move into talking more about you and what you do. So I'll let you go first.
Okay. Well,
I remember the restaurant is my first really vivid memory of that meeting, but I'll let you go.
Absolutely. Yes. So we've known each other since grad school days, and there was like all the like normal like grad school contacts that we had. We didn't have a ton of classes together because we were in different cohorts.
Yeah.
We were separated by a year, but there was all the like regular, departmental stuff that we did and all of that. And then I feel like it was, we had like I don't know that I would call us friends at that point. We were like certainly like, collegial and friendly, but more kind of acquaintances at that point. And then like, as it happens in academia, departmental drama ensues. And I think some of that threw us together at such a higher rate, and I know, well, my perception of it was that for a while there in particular, you kind of offered yourself, it felt like, as a lifeline, just as like to like a lifeline to sanity, and like don't lose sight of the fact that this world is not the real world. It's the world of academia where things happen that are not reality, and like you are actually still valuable and worthwhile as a human, but also as a future psychologist. And so you became kind of part of my network and my support system. I was blessed to have a very good support system through all that mess, but you were a big part of that. And I feel like, then the rest is history, because, we figured out that we have that like really nice level of like compatibility as friends, where it's just like, there's enough that we share and enough that's different, that it's just one of those like chef's kiss ones, where you're just like, I have found my people. This is it.
Yes, so true. I definitely would say you are, one of those not once in a lifetime, but like, you get you read the research, you need 2 or 3 core friends and you'll be all right. And, but, I would say one of the, I think you would agree too, like the sense of humor.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's just not a lot of people, and I came from law, so definitely that wasn't like, they weren't breaking down the houses there with their stand-up comedy. I had some friends that were lovely. I'm not saying that they weren't ever funny, but, and we were in, very small cohorts. I don't know that people would realize that in a PhD program, you have like 4 people in your cohort.
Right.
So, your chances for being like, boom, compatible.
Right. Absolutely. Big. Yeah. I mean, because I remember everybody commenting on my cohort was huge. It was one of the largest cohorts ever. It was 10 people. Right. Like a massive cohort of people.
Yes. I think mine was 6.
Easily in one room.
Yes, for sure. So the sense of humor, definitely. I think that also helps me as a therapist as well, because I don't know. Sometimes I just don't know. what you would do if you didn't laugh. So yes, for sure. We have been friends for a long time, and I think we also are very compatible in how we view what we do.
Very much
Definitely.
so. Yeah.
I mean, it was a calling for me. I feel like it is for you too. And so I think that's just really lovely when you think about, I mean, we may talk about burnout some today, but one of the things that I think helps tremendously with burnout, because it's so externally driven, is when you have somebody in the profession you're in who gets you and gets it, and you can go, hey, this thing, and it's like, you're not crazy. Oh my gosh. I mean, me too. And it's just so easy to do that. So it's like a part of burnout proofing to get through those things.
Yes.
That's definitely been another great thing. So I guess I will start now that we've talked about that. Anything else I don't think we should tell any embarrassing stories. So I'm going to just omit that. Maybe that'll be another episode.
That's right.
When I'm like, filming you secretly. We'll see what you say.
Right, exactly. There will be more curse words if you do that. But
that's right. Yeah, no, never. Well,
never.
I did interview someone not too long ago, and you can probably hear it in the recording, but my editor had to do some work, and he's just like, I can't help myself. I just can't. I'm like, okay, that's fine. That's fine.
That's fair. Absolutely.
Okay, so I don't think I've ever heard this either. So first, I wanted to just ask you about your origin story as a psychologist. Wolverine has an origin story. So like, Dr. Sarah Lyle, your origin story as a superhero psychologist.
Absolutely. That's company that I didn't expect to be thrown in with. But yeah, no, absolutely. So my origin story starts pretty early. Growing up, I had an uncle who was a child psychologist. So it was always like, it was kind of in the family. I grew up in one of those families that, it was admirable to be a psychologist. Going to a psychologist, we didn't know how we felt about that. But we thought it was very admirable.
So much sense, right?
Right, exactly. And there was also, like, especially on my dad's side, both sides, but more like noticeably on my dad's side, there's also like a very hard push towards service. You have a fair number of military service members in my family, and then on my dad's side, my dad and both of his brothers were doctors. His dad was a doctor. It's like varying specialties, varying areas, and all of that. You got PhDs and MDs and all of that, but service driven. And so that's always been a theme in my family. I think if you look at everybody in the family, we tend to have that sort of mentality of, we're also big like scouting family. So it's that same like thing that you see in scouting where it's like, you leave it better than when you got there, but kind of towards life and the world in general, right?
Okay.
Like, how do you live your life in a way that leaves things better than when you got here? And it's like, it's not often like explicitly talked about, but it's just sort of that like water we all swim in. So unfortunately, when I was in my kind of preteens, he passed away in a car accident. And it was kind of a rough few years for my family. My mom's dad had passed away, and then, my uncle passed away. And in that like 3-year period, also for me, it was like, it's one that not everybody gets, but also our family dog had passed away, and he was like as old as I was. And so like, had been
that dog,
the fabric of my life, I'd not lived without this dog being there. It was like, there was a 3-year period, there was a lot of loss. And so I think everybody in the family kind of got hit by one or another of these losses, at least my little immediate family. So there was just a lot of hurt and a lot of people struggling individually, but that gets really hard in a family system when different people are hurting for different reasons or in different ways.
And you're a child, especially.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And I was also at that like awkward age with it where it's really easy to feel very aware of yourself and your own stuff. Yes. And you're struggling a little bit to perspective take, and I've always been reasonably good at it, but I was also a normal teenager. And, so like, I remember it took me an embarrassingly long time to realize that like, but my dad lost his brother, and like, I knew it.
Oh, the perspective taking,
cognitively,
right? Developmentally,
like,
though, that fits the timeline, right? I mean,
exactly. So when all of that happened, there were two things in it that really sort of drove me in the direction that I ended up going. So one was the fact that like losing my dog, I loved animals. I wanted to help people. I thought, oh, maybe I could be a veterinarian. That, I like science and math and all the STEM things. And
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
didn't call it STEM back then, but we do now. So,
Yeah.
I liked all of that world. I was like, oh, that's an option. But my uncle's funeral was it it was one of the most traumatic experiences of my life. It was a beautiful service, but just I had hit that point where like I wanted everybody to go away and leave me alone.
Yeah.
I wanted to just like tunnel into myself and pretend that the rest of the world didn't exist. But it was also something that even despite that, it was so touching because he lived in Virginia at the time. My family was in South Carolina, and so many people, like more than like one or two people, there were a number of people who drove from Virginia down to South Carolina just to be there, to tell us how much my uncle had meant to them, how much he had done for their family or their school system or, people that they know. Like he made such an impact. Of course, we knew that he was this lovely human and so special to us, but just that sort of window into, he didn't do it in any sort of way where his name was in lights, where he was a name that anybody, outside of circles who knew him personally would recognize who he was. He was just a normal human being, but he lived life in a way that made some really profound impacts. There were really profound ripples that his existence left. And I remember thinking even at the time, that's the kind of person that I want to be. That's the kind of life I want to live. I want to live the kind of life where what people say about me after I'm gone is the way that I changed their life positively or impacted them positively. Not that everybody has to like me, not that I have to be the perfect fit for everybody, but I want to make that kind of impact on the world. I want to be the kind of person who makes that like subtle, kind of quiet, but profound impact.
Yes.
And so the combination there initially sent me off towards veterinary medicine because it happened in close succession. And so I started down that path, and that's how I ended up at Auburn. Right, War Eagle. They had a vet school, and it was kind of the kind of place that I was the ag school that I was looking for, and all of that. And then, like, I was thinking about it before we started talking, and it's like there's a song that popped into my head because I'm a music person, and so that's often kind of how I process things. Is I'll think of songs will pop into my head or lyrics will pop up, and there's a song that I've always loved, but I've realized as I've hit my stride, which is how I like to describe middle age. As I've hit my stride in life, I realized like, wow, no, that really is a very me song. It's a song from, I don't remember when the song came out, but Jim Croce, who was like 60s and early 70s. It's called The Hard Way Every Time. I learned the hard way every time. And it's like, but it's this like really catchy, upbeat sounding song all about how, he keeps running into walls, but that's how he's gotten where he is, and he wouldn't change, the places he's been and the versions of himself that he's been and where he ended up and all of that. But that kind of recognition that like, wow, I really do have to like hit that wall before I'm gonna change course. And so it was like a series of those things, I had like a health crisis in college and realized that like that like hard science world is not really supportive oftentimes around like needing even temporary accommodations, having things like there's just such the competitive spirit there is just different than over here in psychology, and psychology is competitive, but in a different sort of way. And it also made me think of like, is this really the lifestyle I want to have? I still want to be able to be mom, all that. So I started to kind of think and shift gears. I initially shifted to psychology just for like a major because I knew I didn't want to do pre-vet anymore, and so it was like, well, if I don't, right. And if I'm probably not going to do anything that requires organic chemistry. So if I don't have to keep taking things like organic chemistry, like I don't hate that. So psychology is interesting enough. I had the uncle who was a psychologist. I'll shift to that until I figure out what I'm going to do. And of course, found something that I really loved. And my grad school was very similar. I picked Auburn in part because it had a little bit of it would train a little bit in kind of the academic world, but also the clinical world. It had some research. It's not like a top tier research institute, but my sense of it, especially as an undergrad, is like, oh, they're doing some decent research. I could get some basic training kind of across the board, figure out what I want to do. And I was pretty sure I wanted to do academia. And then I started doing clinical work as part of our training. And I was like,
this is fun. Yes.
Oh, well, this is clearly where I'm meant to be.
Yes.
So
yes.
I wouldn't have been able to see it until I started doing it. I would have, I would have talked myself out of it.
Yes.
If I'd gone to grad school thinking I wanted to be a clinician, I would have talked myself out of it. I would have
Isn't that
downplayed my own ability.
Yeah.
And
downplayed your own ability.
Oh, absolutely. I would have felt like it was too much responsibility. It's too much pressure. Like, I don't know, oof, yeah. I want to help people, but like, I'm going to do the research, I'm going to like teach people how to do that.
Yeah.
I'm comfortable in that world.
Yes.
My parents are teachers and things like that. So I kind of grew up in that world a little bit, and that felt more comfortable.
Yes.
But yeah.
Something I wanted to mention this is just something that came up for me.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I don't know if you've ever, I know you work with a lot of healthcare professionals too. When I work with when you and I talk about clinical.
Yeah.
Like, just so everybody knows in the back row. In our program, I felt like being clinical. Yeah. I felt like you did, because I had come from law, and like I took this, opportunity to work with people. I was like, this is a little scary. I definitely took it seriously. Like, it was important. Like, I could hurt people if I was a bad clinician.
Yeah.
And I actually, that's part of my origin story, as I'd seen some people get hurt by bad clinicians.
Right.
But in our program, like, it was like you were research or you were clinical. Clinical means you wanted to do what I think of as the art part, where you were taking the research and you're applying it like an artist. Right. And, when people aren't good clinically, we also often mean they don't have great interpersonal skills, which are very necessary. But it's interesting when you work with a physician, in their world, being clinical. Too clinical means you're more doctor-y.
That's true. No, that's true. Yeah.
You're more like, I am doctor, you are patient. And it's just kind of interesting. It's something I noticed because I was talking with a physician, and I'm like, we are not talking about the same clinic. But when I've worked with people with medical trauma, they will say, he was just so clinical. And I'm like, well, that's actually not, I didn't know that.
Right.
It's just kind of interesting. I don't know why I thought about that, but
yeah, no, it is interesting. And I think it's a good point of clarification that, like, on our end, that's very much you're leaning towards the people, and you're leaning towards the, like, I want to be like in the trenches, working with the people, talking to people, doing the thing. And the more academic research end is the kind of less people-y of the spectrum. Yeah. Yes. It's a little bit like we speak like slightly different dialects. Like, I feel like we're, it's like an American and
yes,
a
British
person talking about biscuits.
Yeah.
And it's like, which biscuits?
Which biscuit do you mean? I mean, like a cat head biscuit. I think you mean a cookie. Okay.
Right. Yes.
That's not what I'm talking about.
Right. Absolutely.
Oh, that's so funny. Okay. All right. So that's really helpful. So for you, it seems like, I don't know, I want to call you like the reluctant psychologist almost.
Initially,
like, right? Like you're the scientist, and you realize, I mean, I was surprised by how much science there was going to be. I didn't realize how much science. I mean, I knew there was going to be science, but I didn't fully realize I was going to have to basically get a master's in statistics to get my PhD.
Right.
Science and math, I thought would be part of it, but not like the whole thing. But yeah, that's really interesting. So when you got to this place, I kind of, I'm asking this question, but I was there witnessing some of these, when we were talking about these things. Like when you worked at student counseling, I remember that. But your evolution as a clinician, like, when did it start to include working with, I'm just going to use a broad term, trauma?
Yeah, absolutely. So it really was tied directly in. So the research area that I started out with, and that I was primarily interested in. I'm always somebody who has a little bit of diversity in my interest. There's like the thing that I really love, but then there's all these like associated things. And I'm like, oh, these are also cool. But the main interest that I had going in was doing research on post-traumatic stress disorder, trauma reactions, and treatments for PTSD, for trauma. And so that was something that I felt very strongly about. And I had kind of throughout that, I think again, it's that knowledge of both things. I have a fair number of service members in my family. So actually both my grandfathers served in World War II. And I saw like on some levels, I was kind of shielded from it. They didn't really talk about their experiences, except if they got left in a room alone together. And then you would kind of hear them talking.
Oh, wow. That's
but
the
if they
VA,
became
basically.
aware that, yeah, exactly. If they became aware that somebody was in earshot,
yeah, I know, right.
They would shut that down. And so they didn't talk about their experiences. I know very little about it. And I think they both handled it fairly well. They weren't impacted as intensely as I've seen some others be impacted, but like
Sure.
of course it left its marks. Of course it had its impact on their life. And kind of who they became later on. And so I saw that, but then also I think my family going through what we went through around my uncle's death and my grandfather and, all of that, and kind of seeing the impacts on different individuals, the different ways that people were hurting, and always having had that kind of predisposition to wanting to be helpful, wanting to help people feel better and all of that, make the world a better place, all of that good stuff. I think, that was my idea. It was like, well, I'll help with the research around this. And then as I started to shift to clinical, it was like, oh, okay, well, I could work at the VA. I have another uncle, my dad's other brother. He's worked at the VA his whole career. And, so I could follow in like his footsteps a little bit too. And, I could do that. So it kind of still came out of that, all of that same place of just really wanting to give back and to help. My brother is also retired now, Air Force, and having gone through, I was in high school when 9/11 happened, and he's 6 years older than I was, so he was already in the Air Force at that point. And so kind of seeing it a little bit firsthand as well, hearing him when he was deployed a couple of times, talking to him on the phone, and just, I could hear, I was old enough at that point that I could hear it in the way he talked about, the way the brain starts to kind of like try to process even in the moment, of like, the base gets hit with mortar fire every day, but they don't have great technology, so most of them don't explode.
It's like, oh, great, good aim. But they're throwing bombs.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, okay.
Bombs. Yeah.
Right. It's like, I hear what you're saying, and I hear that you mean this is reassuring. But I'm living over here in much
where
greater
that doesn't
city,
happen.
where that still feels way too close for comfort.
Right.
And so, absolutely. Just kind of thinking, well, I'll be a part of that. And again, learned the hard way every time. And, I had some great experiences at the VA. I did a fair bit of my training. My internship was at the VA. Loved working with the veterans. That part I was right about. Which is
like our residency. Some people don't realize that's our residency. They call it an internship for who knows why. But
they do. Yes. But our kind of year-long training that is pre-finishing our degree. So we have to finish that year in order to finish our PhD in clinical psychology. Yeah.
Yes.
So, loved the setting in so many ways because it's a fantastic population to work with. If you want to meet that goal of feeling like you are making a positive impact on people who very much deserve it and very much need it, like that is a place that, I don't know that you should get a better place to work. The problem is it's also a massive bureaucracy.
It sure is, isn't it? Yes, it is.
It is. And so, and at that point it was smaller, but still important things. I had my son at that point and just really needed a greater degree of flexibility in work hours and also just, how I wanted my career to look. And we also made a move at a kind of inopportune moment because in our field, we also typically most states have to do a postdoc. So after you finish your PhD, you have to go through and do some additional supervised work just to prove to whatever state you're going to get licensed in that, no, I really do know what I'm doing at a basic competency level, and I am not going to hurt people
They don't
actively.
do this in law, by the way. Just
Right.
It's fascinating. Like, go hurt people, learn on the job, charge people
Right.
hundreds of dollars when you don't know what you're doing.
Absolutely.
That was totally different for me.
Yeah. So it's like, and so in our field, it's like, it's, I hate to you say that it's overkill, because is there such a thing with something like making sure we're not hurting people and people are competently trained? There's not really, but it also like can feel that way at the time.
Yes,
because you're
it's
like,
a lot of time.
Okay, I have like thousands of hours of face-to-face clinical work by the time I like get done with this process. I've done a whole year-long job. I've been trained and supervised by all these different people in all these different places and taken all of the licensure tests and all of that. Now I still have to go back and do more. Okay.
Yes.
But you do. And I ended up, because of the move, I ended up doing an informal postdoc. So I just kind of found my own. And so it ended up being at a private practice, which is something that I had always said, like, oh, dear God, why would anyone do that? Why? Like, that sounds awful. You have no benefits. You have no security. Like, if like, what? No. Oh, like, why would anyone not want to work in the safety and security
The VA.
of like a system that will, no. Now, having worked on internship and things like that for some of those systems, I saw the other side of the coin. I was like, oh, okay, well, because you have less flexibility, and because, yes, the system is there sometimes to, provide you with things like benefits and retirement accounts and all of that, but also there's costs that you pay with that in terms of somebody else is picking the structure, whether it works for you or not. And so it's like, okay, all right, well, I'll do the postdoc in private practice. We'll see how it goes. Loved it. Absolutely loved it. And so I've been in private practice then ever since.
Yeah. Okay. So how would you say, like, working now, we're working together and with high achievers, high performers. Labels are for jars, not for people. Right. People, it's more like describing the behavior of people who are high achieving. How would you describe working with trauma in this population and how it's different? And I definitely think it is. And there's not, it's interesting. I've done a lot of research in trauma. I've conducted a lot of research in trauma, but there's not a lot of research with this population. It's kind of interesting. I guess it's hard to identify this population. And anyway, but what would you say, just, from your experience, because you and I did some of my training. I worked at a medical center, so I did the VA and other settings, but I've worked in the VA with trauma. I worked in a residential treatment center with kids and teens. So I've seen trauma across the lifespan and across different populations. How would you say it look in this population, things that people might misunderstand or misconceptions, anything that you can think of there that might be helpful?
Yeah, absolutely. So I had noticed it before I started working heavily with this population that I kind of feel like people, I'm sort of with you with, the disclaimer about labels being for jars. I kind of feel that way about anytime I say it's an either or. It's like I always feel the need to clarify. It's really a spectrum. It's really the dichotomy is artificial. We're adding it to make it easier to digest, but it's underneath that, it's really a spectrum. But like kind of broadly, I feel like people tend to kind of break one direction or another on the spectrum when trauma kind of reaches that point. Initially, immediately after a trauma, everyone experiences these symptoms because it's just normal. It's just how your body responds to trauma.
Everybody looked like they would probably meet criteria for PTSD. And I think the study that I read that looked at that, it was like within 90 days.
Yeah.
Everybody. But then eventually people start to fade out.
Right. Exactly. People, so a lot of people will kind of naturally recover. They have the support system that they need. They have the resources they need, the resilience that they need to figure it out on their own to do that healing. It's not that there's not work involved. They're just able to do the work. Right. And so you see them kind of slowly get better and they carry on. But the folks that continue to struggle longer term, the symptoms don't go away. They get kind of stuck somewhere in that process. those individuals, I find they kind of tend to break one of two directions. There are the people who kind of, you look at the impacts on their lives and like you can see it. It doesn't take a ton of training to see that, like, wow, we're struggling. This person looks like they're struggling. They're, crying a lot, or, they're actively, like, they're struggling to get out of the house, or things like that, right? Like, they come in and they say, like, I'm so on edge all the time, and I just kind of can't calm down, and I'm not sleeping, and I'm having nightmares, and it's very obvious.
Right.
And so they go that direction. It's like, okay, I can see that. That's what I dealt with more in other settings. I often saw more of those folks in kind of just when I was just getting like general population, right? I feel like that's a lot of people who have some kind of long-term trauma reactions that they're struggling with, some long-term post-traumatic stress symptoms. But then there's this other group that tends to go a different direction, where it's like, I kind of feel like it's the ones who have either some of the things that they need long-term, but maybe not quite enough, maybe not quite all of the, like there's a few items missing from the grocery list, and so we can't make the meal. Or they already had enough pre-existing structure to their lives. That's, sort of my own, it's not completely based on research. I can't like pull out studies for that, but that's just sort of my sense of it from the work that I've done, the years that I've spent doing this. So those folks, it tends to look a little bit different. Certainly there are times where there's obvious distress, but a lot of times what I see more in this population is folks who kind of use the structure that they have, often things like work or creative endeavors, because I often like lump a lot of creatives in to this population. I think it's kind of two, twin populations. There's a ton of overlap just in terms of the like underlying psychology of like what drives a person to do this thing. And so you see more kind of flattening of emotion. You see, I'm kind of avoiding in a different way. Instead of avoiding literally by I can't leave the house, it's more I'm avoiding by I'm just so busy all of the time.
Yeah.
And there's just so many things. And I have downtime. No, I don't, because there's these 15 things that I desperately need to do right now.
Yes.
Like avoiding
it's more by doing.
Yes, exactly. It's a different style of avoidance. It's still the same kind of root cause. It's still avoidance. Yeah. And so it can still dive into that kind of unhealthy territory. So I'll see people who are burning out or who just are starting to recognize that like it's not terribly functional. Like I can't put my phone down and have dinner with my spouse and my kids without feeling that urge to like pick it back up again, because what's happening is their brain is slowing down enough that the warning bell starts to go off of like, oh no, the shields are dropping. Yes. Red alert.
Which is all happening right at I think that's another thing with this population is like the acknowledgement that there are things happening at a subconscious level.
Absolutely.
Your nervous system does not need your prefrontal cortex to do a thing.
It does not.
Because if it did, when I threw a ball at you, it would hit you in the head, right?
Right.
I must think this is a ball and I must catch it. No, we just balls.
You just react. Yeah.
Right. Can you, before I love this point, so I want to make sure we remember where we're at. I wanted to see if you could just mention when you said the word avoidance.
Yeah.
I know what that means, but I think a lot of people, when you say that word, just boom, what do you mean avoiding what? What are they avoiding?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the context of trauma specifically, there's kind of like the symptom list answer, so we're avoiding reminders. So things like people, places that remind us of the thing that we went through, the trauma that we went through, that maybe is not fully processed yet. And so it brings up some of that emotion. And so we're kind of avoiding our memories, we're avoiding our emotions. Sometimes that means we're literally avoiding certain people, certain places, certain activities that we used to do. The kind of classic example that I think just about anybody can at least relate to, even if it's not something you've been through, is if you can imagine like being in a car accident at a particular intersection. It would feel pretty reasonable that like for a couple of weeks, you might like see if you could find an alternate route. Like you might just be like, I just would rather not.
Yes.
I can handle getting in the car and going to the grocery store, but I'm going to go the back way. I'm not going to go through that big intersection, or maybe this other big intersection that also feels kind of like that other big intersection where the accident happened because it's also a big intersection.
Right. Right.
It feels kind of reasonable in the immediate aftermath. And I think most of us have probably experienced some level of that.
Yes.
So it's those sorts of things. But if that happens long term, we keep avoiding those intersections, kind of metaphorically speaking, then it can build up on us. And the thing with anxiety in particular is that avoidance is tied to anxiety. It's tied to your fight or flight. It's tied to that survival system in your brain that does, to your point, right? Like operates at that more subconscious level because this is a part of the brain that is not part of your conscious control. This is a part of the brain that's like, this is your amygdala and your limbic system and all of this system that it's part of. If I'm getting my facts right, don't come for me, a biologist, if you're listening, if I'm wrong about this, but I think it's every mammalian species on the planet has basically the same structures in their brain. And then there's like analogous structures in a lot of like birds and reptiles. So like most animals that are not bugs on the planet have
poor bugs.
Right.
Yeah. They have that system. Right. And it's not, it's not, I think it's like this. Right. And then we can talk about, we'll wait on going into control and how that works with avoidance.
Right.
But people, I think that's when you're talking about this, let me kind of reframe, we're talking about like this fight, flight, freeze. Mm-hmm. And I think what I'm hearing you say, and it is with this population, although it's not functional for them long-term, short-term, it functions great. Other people love it when you go, I can stay at work. I don't need to go home and see my family. I can just work. So I have too much work to do. I'll just stay here, honey. You just, do whatever you need to do with the kids. Yeah. And look, they're getting awards at work and bonuses. It's like amazing.
They're the top performer in the company, right? Their company that they founded is winning awards. They're beating the competition by leaps and bounds.
Yes, and
because they can do things that the other companies can't do because the CEO is up at 3 a.m. answering emails, right?
Right. But it's really what it really is if we were looking at it, like we put like another, like, I don't know, we put a squirrel in there. It's really a fight, flight, freeze, right? It's you would see the twitching and you would see but it looks in our very busy American culture, it looks normal.
Right. Productive.
We went to French people do not think we look normal. I've learned. I was listening to some podcast about them judging us, and I was like, "Wow, we sound horrible. Like we just sound like we're all nuts." But I think that point is something that's because you've worked with it on this, you can see it because it transcends the symptom list, but it's not obvious to most people. In fact, it's
right. It's being kind of channeled through like a tunnel. And so you can't see it from the outside looking in as easily without understanding a lot of the underpinnings, without being able to kind of see it's, I use this metaphor a lot. So if any of my clients ever listen to this, they're going to probably have a chuckle because they're like, I've heard this. I talk a lot about like root systems, that like there's some weeds that are really obvious on the surface and they've got a very small root system. But then there's things where it's like, it doesn't look like much, but like those roots just go forever.
Yes, the rhizomes, like what are those things called? I can't remember what they're called.
Absolutely. Yep. And I think especially the version that happens in this population with like more high achieving folks, more high performing folks, creatives, it tends to be those deeper root systems. It tends to be that like the growth got pushed down. And so you figured out how to channel it in a way that on the surface feels pretty functional. It's not super obtrusive, but it's occupying a lot of space underneath the surface. And it's stealing a lot of resources under the surface. And that's where the problems start to come in, is it's like you start to see people come into therapy for burnout, for, I just am not able to like structure my time as effectively as I used to, or, or something else that has upset the apple cart and like taken just enough of the remaining resources that like things are starting to, the dominoes are starting to fall. They come in for this completely unrelated thing, and like you start to do the work, and like 4 sessions in at most, you're kind of like, Oh, okay. See, this is a problem. But this is not the problem
Right.
because
This is
this
like a
just
fever from COVID.
right, right. But this is like the
Right.
fever is not, it's your system's response to the problem.
Right. Which
And
is
but the real
good.
problem is
It's
here.
actually going, hello, something is
Right.
wrong. Pump the brake. But
Exactly.
yeah,
And
it becomes the problem to get rid of, to get back to
right.
fight, flight,
Right.
freeze, whatever we're doing. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And not to, kind of steer too much to correct me if I'm going this direction too soon, but I feel like that's a lot of the reason that I do focus so much on some of those like that other portion of the system, the emotions, the like listening to your own cues, the like reconnecting with your own experience of yourself. Because I feel like often that's where things are breaking down. We've gotten kind of disconnected
Oh, right.
from
Right.
being aware of like the fact that like we are experiencing emotions. And sometimes people will like actively say, that like they're coming in and they're just like, I'm just so irritable all the time. Like I just and like I need you to help me stop that. I just need to stop doing that. And I'm like,
Yeah, I know.
okay. I can get you where you want to go, but you want to go right, and I'm gonna take you left. But I promise this is the faster way.
Yes. Yes.
And this is gonna be better.
Yes, because there are worse things to feel than pain. And
Yeah.
when we try to avoid pain, it's like there's an act picture of this of a person who's trying to avoid pain. It's like at the middle, and they go on this exit ramp and they circle, but then it gets bigger because
Yes.
like going through the pain would be so much easier than the suffering.
Absolutely.
But that is very, very difficult for people to see. And then
so
there's
hard.
conditioning. Like
Right.
it depends on the client. I mean, I've worked with it transcends gender. I think a lot of people would say men are probably more, socialized to not have certain emotions. Like anger's fine, but you can't feel sad or whatever. But I see it in this population. It transcends gender, race, everything.
Absolutely.
And that, it's so like, I do want, like, and I'm sure you do this too. I validate that, like, if you don't get why emotions are so important, it makes complete sense you would want to avoid them.
Oh yeah.
Like, right? It's like, my body's doing things. I don't know what it's doing. Like, why is it doing that? Let's stop that. Because the context doesn't work, right? If I'm an athlete and I'm performing and my heart rate's increased, like the context fits. But when I have a panic attack and I'm like, nothing's happening. Why am I having a panic attack at my desk?
Right.
For a lot of these folks, it actually, you got off the merry-go-round that was going 300 miles an hour and now you feel unsafe.
Yes.
Because it stopped moving. Oh,
right.
Like,
Exactly.
Makes no sense. So what is that like when you think about working with this population and starting with this place, like how does that look at the beginning? Is they're thinking like, you're going to help me get rid of my anxiety. And you're like, you're going to die in 5 seconds if I get rid of your anxiety. Like you would go out and walk into traffic. So that's not what we're doing. But how does that start? And what do clients say when they've gotten some of these skills? Like what do they say they noticed or whatever?
So I think at the beginning, a lot of the work is kind of assessing where people are at. Because there's a range, there's a spectrum in terms of how open people are to the feedback.
Yes.
Of, I would like to present you with an alternative view than the one you've been operating on that will make a lot of sense when I get done explaining it, I hope. But like, it's going to feel very weird and different at first. I think there are some folks who are aware of enough of the issues, or like, honestly, like they have enough respect for the expertise that I'm bringing to the table that they're kind of willing to kind of go with me a little bit, even if they're like, I don't know exactly where we're going, but you seem competent and good. And so, okay, I will walk with you.
If they only knew the bus driver is drunk. Like, no, he's not. She's totally competent, but it's just really funny.
Yeah. Yeah. But, I think there are times where that's the beginning part is the conversation is let me kind of explain to you. And especially because, I so much validation, so much normalizing.
Absolutely.
I start by kind of it's so much a part of doing trauma work anyway, is just wherever people fall on the spectrum of how they respond to trauma and what symptoms they're struggling with and all of that. So much of the job is helping people understand why their system is doing what it's doing, because it all actually does make sense, but it can feel crazy making if you don't understand why it makes sense, if you don't understand why my system is doing the things that it's doing. And so a lot of times I can feel like I can, one, start to build a sense of, self-efficacy for the client. Like they can start to understand themselves better, which that's one of my like happy places as a therapist, right? Like when I can help people understand their own self and their own system, right? Like that to me is inherently a healthier, stronger place to be as a human. And so when I can help somebody find that, like that, I just love that. Like that is, it's just so lovely, so I try to do that, but it also builds that credibility. It helps people connect the dots in ways that start to make sense because it is a little bit more informational. So I kind of, I'm a big proponent of, within the field, we call it kind of client-centered. I tend to view myself as very client-centered. I try to meet people where they're at. I try to respect that every person's an individual and is coming at this from their own place, from their own experiences and their own perspective. And it doesn't matter how right I am. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how right they are. What matters is they are as they are, and they have a goal of where they'd like to get. And how do I help them go from where they are to where they'd like to be, respecting their own agency and their own individuality as much as possible, and kind of using that knowledge of who they are as best I can to facilitate the process, to make it more efficient, to help it happen faster and more effectively. Right. So so often starting where people are at and kind of going, okay, we're very cognitive right now. We're very in our heads around this. We're very logical. We're very rational. Let me explain to you the very logical and rational reasons why your system's doing the things that it's doing.
Yes.
Let's start there. And then I can kind of pull it out. The other thing that I think folks who are a little more tense around the process, a little more hesitant to really engage with like emotion specific work, especially if I, kind of use that language of like, we're going to do emotion focused therapy. It's like, what?
That sounds horrible.
Right? It's like, I think some of the sense is because every time they step off that merry-go-round you were talking about, this going 300 miles an hour, it feels awful.
It does.
And so when they hear somebody go, you know what we're going to do? We're going to do that more. They're like, no, thank you. I don't think you're licensed by what state exactly, right? And fair, right? Like if I just came at it that way, like absolutely, like I feel like people are completely justified in going, that sounds crazy. Thank you for your time. I will not be coming back. No.
Yes.
So with that, I think it's also helping people understand that like, no, this is the way to your goal. That actually, because you referenced it earlier, we didn't go fully into it, but because just biologically you cannot control this system, it's actually designed to work the other way around. That like if your logical, rational brain and your fight or flight system get into a fight, your fight or flight system's going to win that battle every time.
Absolutely.
Because biologically it's designed to, and for good reason. I mean, it makes sense if you stop to think about it, right? If I happen upon a tiger that's escaped from the zoo, I don't need it, like you were saying with the ball earlier, like I don't need to think a ton. I just need to not be there. Like I just need to, I just need to be anywhere else, preferably behind a very heavy locked door with few windows, right? Like that's, I just need to react in ways that optimize my safety.
Right. And it's similar, like, when you're just talking, I was thinking it's also like the concept of pain in general, right? I mean, people who cannot feel pain have many, there's like books written about these people that and all these studies we had to learn in psychology about all the people with the things that affected their brains and they couldn't see it. It's a big problem if I can't feel pain. And a lot of what we see in this population. You see fight, flight, freeze, everybody's going to do all it, but you see a lot of freeze.
Yes.
As they're like sitting in this place where everybody's going, you're so great to be burned out. Yay, burnout. But burnout, there's a place, on one spectrum of burnout where you're not cynical and frustrated. You're now just numb. and you can't
Yeah.
feel it. And you're like, nothing's going to change. It's just the way it is. I mean, how many times have you heard, it is just the way it is. You don't understand. I mean, I remember being a lawyer going, like, there's no way out. This is the way it is, and if somebody said, hey, you just like quit, it's like my brain would have exploded, right? Like, you want me to burn down the world or something. But it's that, I think that concept of, not that pain is good. It's like, if you
It's
can't,
helpful.
it's helpful. It teaches you what works and what doesn't.
Right.
And it's not, people will say, well, don't you think sometimes, are like, there's a quote that talks about how emotions are never wrong by Kirk Strassel, who's one of the developers of ACT. And I love that quote. And I totally agree with him. But I think the corollary is, that's not all there is.
Right.
Your emotions and your pain are not the whole story.
Exactly.
But you need to feel them. And the funny thing is, the irony, and I'm sure you were going to go here, is that the more you can feel them and sit with that and tolerate it, and then like lean in to do things that matter to you, the less your emotions get it wrong.
Right. And also, on average, it's not that you never experience super intense emotions, because sometimes situations are intense, and intense emotion then results. But I also find that, for most people, myself included, right? The more of this work that you do, the better you get at working with your emotions, being in touch with your emotions. Also, the less intense they tend to be on average.
Right.
Because, I use the metaphor all the time of, especially when we're doing trauma work, it's very much like, we are standing in front of a very large dam, and we are talking about blowing it up and letting all that water out.
Right.
And it's, well, what's going to happen initially is a flood, and it's going to be intense, and it's a lot. And that's scary to think about. It's going to be a little bit scary to feel. But I think I hear it so often, that fear that but I'm just like, I'm never going to be able to stop. I'm never going to be able to get it under control. And it's like, no. This is a natural system. This is a biological system. Think of how it works in nature. If you blew up that dam, what would happen after the initial flood? It's almost going to go back to being a river.
Yeah.
Not instantaneously, right? But like over a little bit of time, it's going to go back
to
being
look downstream.
River. Right.
It'll grow back.
And I often kind of even extend it past that and go, is it going to follow exactly the same path that it followed before? No, because it's a different river now.
Yeah. Right.
It's been changed. But it's going to go back to being a river. And rivers occasionally flood their banks when the ecosystem around them is healthy. But the healthier the ecosystem is around them, the less often they flood their banks. Right. And the more we kind of take care of the whole system, the better everything tends to work. We are creatures of homeostasis. We like balance. We like equilibrium. Our temperature needs to be in a specific range. Our pH needs to be in a specific range. We need a specific amount of water in our system. Like all the things operate on balance. Emotion is not the only exception to the rule. It follows the same patterns, right? Like it also likes balance. It's not ever your system's not ever going to intentionally throw you out of whack permanently. Right. Or in ways that are destructive. It's not always fun experiencing emotion, experiencing pain. Oftentimes it's inconvenient, it's uncomfortable, it's annoying. But if we're able to master it, if we're able to kind of develop that self-efficacy around it and feel confident in our abilities, trust ourselves to do this work and do it regularly and reasonably well, the benefits are just immense because the whole system is healthier. And especially the more we've learned too about how biological it is, the connections between depression and inflammation in the body and chronic stress and anxiety and immune response and the whole nine yards, all of this is existing within your physical body. It is your brain and your body that are feeling these emotions, that are experiencing these things. It is biological and it affects the rest of your biological system. And so, especially if you're health-minded and you're trying to take good care of yourself, you can follow the guidelines and work out and eat right and sleep well and drink the right amount of water and do all the things. But if you're ignoring this, it's like a wall of the house is missing.
Yeah. Yep.
And you're exposed in this massive way.
Right. Because it's really, I think people, we're talking about how the system works and it's it's biology and it's a beautiful system. Again, like while there's all the things that are happening in the body to be used for, like there's a thing called optimal stress. Like we've got enough to perform. We've got the optimal performance we need. But when we are under stress and ignore it and try to do whack-a-mole or push it down for long periods of time, I mean, then you have like cytokinins in the body, like cell death,
right,
linked to things like autoimmune disorders, which makes a lot of sense that it would,
it really does.
Chronic stress and avoiding that and not responding to it. It's like you have a fever and you're just like, I'm just going to let that go. That's probably fine. I've had a low-grade fever for 20 years. I'm sure it's fine.
Right.
But once you take that piece in with the health and the diet and the sleep, it's like game-changing. It's just...
Oh, it's huge. Yeah.
Then there's like your bullet. It's like, you're not bulletproof, literally. Please do not go and apply bulletproof logic. But like, you're bulletproof in the sense that your brain doesn't, like, it's not, it's basically able to kind of absorb what's coming, and you're not, the ambiguity of what's going to come or what isn't the whole thing.
Right.
You're just really kind of waiting. When it happens, you deal with it and you know what to do. And I was going to ask you, maybe this segues into it, about how does listening to your body and, and when you say listen, it's not just like, I hear you, I'm going to now ignore you. Listen and respond to your body's needs. How does that help people with like the concept of things like resilience, post-traumatic growth, those types of things?
Absolutely. I think it helps things generally stay on that side of the equation, right? So even thinking about, okay, so somebody who tends towards being very high achieving, very, very much is using that coping system, right? It's the difference between I am pouring myself into my work to escape. And so I can't shut off. I can't stop. I can't find balance, over to I'm able to channel what I need to channel into these endeavors. I'm able to do this functionally, but also I get warning signs. I notice the warning signs that are happening of when I'm pushing too hard or too far, or when something's maybe not quite the right fit. It's like it's maybe a noble endeavor, a worthwhile goal, but there's something about it that's just not, it's not filling my cup up. It's just, there's something about it that's slightly off. And I think that's often a problem with burnout, is like, that's what's happening. It's not that we're doing anything horrible, but we're missing the cues. So I think it does. I think it helps encourage us towards that path generally, because you're able to start to pick up on, all the little signs and signals. And some of them are direct emotional experiences, but some of them are also like, some of my biggest cues that I listen to are things like, wow, that's the like third sleepless night I've had this week, and I feel like I'm clenching my jaw more. Wonder what that's about. I noticed some of the ways that the physical and the emotional are interconnected indelibly, that they are kind of the same thing. And so whereas I might have, previous versions of myself might have written that off as like, well, yeah, I'm stressed. Of course I'm stressed. Going through stressful things. That's fair. So it'll be fine. Once the stress settles, it'll be fine. Now I have much more of a tendency to kind of, even with myself, try to practice what I preach and just kind of like take a minute. And like, honestly, like most of this stuff happens, like I'm brushing my teeth and I'm thinking, and I'm going, what is that? Could it be this? Could it be that? Am I okay? Is this my system trying to tell me something that I'm like really not okay? Am I headed the wrong direction? Is there something I haven't thought through on this? What is it about this that's not settling in quite right?
Right.
And so I just make that space to then do the more kind of cognitive work, because I picked up on my system, almost kind of like, just like tapping on the door, and going like, hello.
Yes.
I often kind of do when I'm talking to clients, kind of almost, anthropomorphize it. I turn into like, almost like there's a little person in your brain who's responsible for this, and they do, like, they start off, they're so polite at first, this little non-existent person in your brain, that like they so gentle, so polite. They're just like, excuse me, can I hate to interrupt, but if you have a minute, if we could, no, okay, all right, cool, that's fine. I'll come back later. I'll just carry on.
Yes.
But this little homunculus has a job to do, and it's going to come back. And
Sure.
and every time it comes back, it gets a little more insistent and a little bit louder, and it takes up a little bit more space until it starts, wrecking things if it has to get you to pay attention. And that's, I think, often why we do feel like we're fighting ourselves when we're headed the direction of like post-traumatic stress versus post-traumatic growth.
Right.
When we're headed the direction of post-traumatic growth, like our whole system is kind of in alignment, and it's not that everything is easy, but it feels, the metaphor with that I often use is it's kind of like any kind of physical training that you might do, right? You can tell anybody who's done any level of that, you can tell the difference between I am pushing my body to do things that are just past what I'm capable of right now. I'm pushing towards a goal versus when things start to hurt in a way that is not okay. Right. Versus like, oh, I'm starting to tweak that muscle. I need to not do that again today.
Right.
That's okay. It's kind of learning to do that with emotions so that we have that direct feedback of like, oh yeah, no, today I don't know if I didn't warm up good enough, or if I'm just having a day, but that was too much today. Okay, I need to not push that hard in that direction today. Okay.
Right.
So I hope that answers your question.
It did. And just wanted to highlight something because as you're talking, it might not be obvious. When we do trauma work, most, evidence-based treatments in trauma, the emotion, CPT, the emotion is typically part one.
Yes.
And that has to be pretty good. And I think people may not get, like, as you're talking about reorienting from top down to bottom up. Your body, you're actually intentionally trying to read your body, which most people come to us avoiding everything about their body. And we're like, you or I might talk about something we're noticing and go, oh, wow, just really kind of avoiding their body altogether. Like there's no body or felt no sense awareness. And you can kind of see it in this person because they're trying this top down part is like, I do not have a body. It is not a thing. Yeah. And we're trying to get that cognitive part, like not out of the way, like we don't need it. It's very super helpful when it knows how this works.
Absolutely.
It's like, like you are so smart. You're like a wizard, but this is like a Jedi. And I mean, can move things with its mind. Like this is the part of you that's the Jedi. We do not want to bury Jedi because that's cool to move rock with your mind. That's really cool.
Right.
So it's that, that belief, like you were talking about how to know if you're okay. Like if you trust your prefrontal cortex before you have this, it'll be like, you're fine.
Right.
Fine.
Yeah.
You should be fine. I mean, like, what do you have to worry about? Just get up and do it.
Be fine. Like, so you're fine.
You're fine. Right. And it's like, but this hurts. Stupid body. Just isn't cooperating. Right.
I did this move the other day. It'll be fine.
It'll be fine. Absolutely. Yeah. And I'll just do it again and again. And even though it hurts, I'll just ignore it and it'll be fine because that's what I believe. So the belief becomes reality, but it is not. I don't know what that song's called, but that's one of my favorite quotes about thoughts is hold on loosely. Don't let go. It's like you want to, is the thought helpful to me and doing what I want to do, what matters to me? Right. Let's listen to that one. See what it says. But the one that's like, I'm going to just let you fade.
Yeah,
and keep acting. But the belief part and the cognitive part, we haven't talked about that in this episode, which we can do, is where it gets like, okay. Because, the beliefs tend to justify the behavior.
They do. Our brains are amazing.
They're amazing.
They're amazing.
They are.
And they, we have this it seems like almost infinite capacity to make it make sense, right? Like, there's that part of your brain, that frontal cortex and all that it does, really, you can hand it just about any sort of set of facts you want and go, okay, make it make sense. It'll find a way. It will
Yep.
make it make sense somehow. Is it reality? Maybe, maybe not. If it
Yep.
can, it'll do reality. If not, who cares? We'll
Right.
just make it make sense somehow.
Right. And it will be
That's
like,
fine.
we'll shoehorn you in here. I mean, your arm's like hanging out here.
Yeah.
Okay. We're going to fit
Right.
it. But I tell people with this, concept of, I think the technical word is coherence, but things making sense. I'm like, as Admiral Akbar would say, it's a
trap. It is. It is. And you
it's
see
a trap.
It's
like,
one
this
of
is not.
Absolutely. And it's one of my favorite things as a therapist. I have a couple of clients who I use a lot of humor, as we've talked about, humor is key in life. And especially when you're doing really hard, deep work like this and
Yeah.
asking people to go to really uncomfortable and painful places when you can kind of not use humor to avoid, but
Yeah.
instead kind of model the idea of using humor to make the hard thing bearable.
Yes.
So I have a couple of clients that I like actively joke about with this when I'm pointing it out in session, just to like, spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down.
Yeah, I was thinking Mary Poppins, everybody.
Yep,
Mary Poppins.
Exactly.
It like, tells you how this doesn't work.
Yes, right. I'll watch it happen. And it's so sweet because people, like, I have heard so many times, people think that I have some sort of like magical or superhuman capacity to like put things, obscure, unknowable things together and hand it to them. And I'm like, you literally told me everything I just told you. You just didn't do it with words, because I'll watch somebody, they're talking about something that's really been hard, or they'll start to dive into something that happened in the past or something that happened recently that's connected to the past often, but they're talking. And I watch them. I watch the tears start to form in their eyes. I watch their body language change. I watch everything about them becomes vulnerable and open. And I start to see the emotion. And then as they're talking and they're really starting to connect with this place, I see the frontal lobe turn on. And I watch it change and I watch it shut down. And then there's usually a comment like, but Janet's going to be fine. And, because, the weather today is great. And I mean, like so much is good in life. And,
you gotta keep those things close. Then focus on those things, the good things.
I just think, if I just kind of stay the course and like keep taking care of my body and trying to get good sleep and like all of it, it's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. Anyway, you were going to say something, and like, so I watch this happen. And so much of the work actually looks like me just kind of rewinding and going, you were saying this. And when you said it, I noticed this. And this is where the humor piece comes back in, where it's just like, I'll have to remind people. It's like, I can't say I don't enjoy making people cry. I promise it's not I'm not doing it for me. Okay.
Right,
it's like,
right.
It's not something like in my life generally that like I just love making people cry. I just love, doing that. I love making people hurt. No, I don't. But I love when I can help people connect the dots.
Okay.
And when they've struggled to notice that they were hurting, when I can pull them back and go, hey, you were just telling me how much that hurt. And I think that's important. And I think you can give that room. And kind of giving people the permission to feel in a way that they need to. It's like, right.
It's a gift. It really
Whether
is.
it's trauma work or just general therapy, it's like, it's such a beautiful moment to see people like reconnect and like really let loose with something that needed out, because that's what that emotion was that I noticed in the first moment. It's like, it's the system trying to like use an opportunity to let some of this go, to release some of the pressure from behind the dam and let some of that water out, sometimes literally, start leaking, and in such a healthy way. And it's just that reminder that like, no, you were right. This is a safe space and you can absolutely, let's go back and let's do that.
Yes.
I think that's important.
Yes.
But it's those sorts of moments that are happening all the time for people, that in their day-to-day life, if there's nobody there to be like, hey Jan, you just blew right past that thing you just said. And I think that was
Right.
really important.
Right.
You know?
And they're all avoiding. So that doesn't happen. Right. So it's interesting as you're talking, I'm thinking about kind of this mantra in trauma. I was like, talking about your trauma does not make you better.
Yeah.
Talking about your trauma, like, and actually, it's not even talking about it. It's experiencing the emotion with a person who has tons of training and expertise in keeping their own stuff together. They don't need
At
anything
least for this
from
hour.
you, right? That's right. That's very important. We are human.
Absolutely.
Lots of training in keeping this safe space, holding it, no judgment. Like when clients, I bet you're thinking, I'm like, I'm sure I know that actually know they're a therapist, they're judgmental, but I don't understand how that's even possible. So
I don't either.
I don't even get this, but I hear you so much but that holding the space, they feel the emotion. It doesn't kill them. We can't form new memories, but we sure can transform the ones we have. And then when they go into the situation with the person who's the bear, they felt it. And it's like, oh crap, like I have Schwartz and crap. Like I have stuff now. I got stuff like Jedi. I can do stuff like, I know when you say that you're trying to help me so much, yet I don't want to talk right now. Can we talk about your interior decorating at the beach house or whatever you're doing? That outfit, we got that. We're not talking about me and this thing. We're just not doing that. My child is vegan. That's right. I know it's weird. It's not like what we've been doing, but he's not eating that pork chop. It's just like they can do this stuff that they couldn't do because of what you've done with them.
Right.
And it's like, I get it. It can seem like magic or voodoo, but it's basically just they're being able to feel the emotion. And honestly, when clients are like, I should have been vulnerable with that person, I'm like, wait, so actually, I don't know about that.
Such a good point. And I think that's actually one of the biggest like interpersonal things that I see with this. It's like, if we're not learning to listen to our cues, it's like, so vulnerability is scary, but then it can also lead us to be overly vulnerable or to like push too hard.
Right. It's a whole other thing.
Because everybody feels scary. And so how do I tell the people who are actually a threat versus the people who aren't? Who knows? Oh, I don't know how you would do that. No, I think the only answer is we figure out how to not feel like everybody is scary, because we can trust our systems to identify the people that aren't, because we're going to listen to ourselves and we're going to notice the way people make us feel. And that doesn't have to be overwhelming. It can be something manageable. And I mean, like to your point, it does. It feels like you're teaching people how to use a lightsaber or something, right? Like it feels like that level of cool to me.
It is so cool.
Yeah.
And then when you see the change happen in their life, I mean, that's the powerful part, is when they're transforming relationships. And not all of these people will change, but I've seen people do amazing things with the other person, not knowing anything is going on. Like they just change how they interact with a person, and now they have transformed a relationship, with a parent or somebody that there could have been regret and you see that and in both ways. And sometimes, I mean, it is, people have to learn to love people from a distance.
Oh yeah.
Which is hard.
Absolutely.
But our cognitive brain is like, nope, you're either with them or you're not. You either love them or you don't. It's
right.
But emotional brain's
they're good, bad.
Spectrum. Oh, that was probably super loud. Spectrum. It's like emotional brain is like, there's a spectrum. We're inclusive here. The spectrum actually goes all the way to the back. It's like, it's just different. But we need the cognitive brain for sure, because there's a lot of things we couldn't do. We didn't have it.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's that kind of that part of that is the Jedi. I don't know. It is. It's kind of a force. Yeah. It is a force because you can feel it with other people, and we don't have time to go into all of that. But I think this awareness of yourself, and when an emotion's less threatening, then people can then be like, oh, I wonder, like, instead of like, she's mad at me. Why is she mad at me? What did I do? It's like, oh, she's twitching. Like, I think she's twitching. I wonder if, does she have a bad day? How was your day? Terrible. But otherwise it would have been like, eggshell, the floor is lava.
Right. She hates me. She's mad at me. Right.
Yes,
Like
and I won't talk to her because that's what I'll do. Had to fix it. I will just act like nothing's happened.
Yes.
But then when you're not afraid of your own emotion, you start to look at others more curious, like a child.
Yeah.
And then you can just do amazing things in relationships. And then, of course, then everybody wants to talk to you and you become a therapist. But
yeah, right. that's the pipeline, right?
that's kind of how that goes now that I think about it. And I'm like, I remember that was part of my, like, everybody like to talk to me about their problems. I'm like, okay,
you don't tell people, Jan, then they won't come see it. No. We're supposed to keep that quiet. That way no one knows.
Yeah, nobody interferes. Yes. Okay. Anything else? It's been lovely talking with you about this. We could talk about it forever, but I'm going to be mindful of people listening. Anything else? Any parting wisdom? I'm going to ask you a question and one more question, but anything else that you can think of that you want to add?
I mean, like, to your point, right? Like, I think, there's many things I could talk about, but I think it's been kind of a good summary of, my journey into this work and what I love about it. And so, I feel like it's been
good.
It's been a good focus. It has.
Good. Yeah. Okay. The only thing I typically ask people a couple of different questions. What I was going to ask you today is, part of why I wanted to do this podcast was to provide help for free, and I'm not saying I'm providing mental health care for free, but just resources that I can trust because I know they're curated with thinking about evidence-based treatment, thinking about the people I'm bringing on the show. But with that in mind, are there any resources, books, movies, podcasts, anything that you think with what we've talked about today could potentially help besides Inside Out? If you haven't seen Inside Out, I'm making a plug for Inside Out 1. Do not see 2 if you haven't seen 1. But other than that, any resources that you can think of, books that are generally helpful?
Yeah, I think, so one that I've used a fair bit is, so John Kabat-Zinn has a few resources, but one of them is this little Mindfulness for Beginners book. And we haven't talked explicitly about mindfulness, but I think it's an analog to a lot of the stuff that we've talked about, right? Yep. Like it's that present focus, present awareness, being able to like notice yourself kind of stuff. It's one that I recommend to people a lot because it's set up in almost like a little, like if you're religious and you've done like a devotional before, it's like it's set up kind of in that style. You can consume it in little tiny chunks, or you can kind of like read a bigger section and all of that. But I find that like it tends to, like, even if like this particular style isn't for you, it tends to kind of get, things flowing for people. The other thing that I tend to recommend, so it's a little bit more diffuse, right? Like, but I tend to just recommend so there's a few that I recommend that are just ways of surrounding yourself with people who are doing the thing. So it's like, it's not actually going to teach you explicitly how to do the thing, right? But find something, and I give a kind of examples of ones that like I like, right? And you kind of have to go find your own, but like find examples of people who are doing the thing. John and Hank Green are great examples of people who do the thing, right? Like they have this like lovely radar for like how to be vulnerable and emotional, but they're also very intelligent people, right? And so like they have a podcast and, YouTube videos and things like that they put out that are not necessarily specific to this topic, but as they talk and as they engage with the world, you watch them do the thing. You watch them grapple with their emotions, sometimes very openly. You watch them be vulnerable, but in ways that feel safe to them. That kind of thing. It's like just kind of like looking in spheres that you already exist in, right? For who are the people that seem to be doing this? And can I notice in them? Because sometimes that also feels, especially at the beginning, a little safer. Right? Like while you're trying to challenge yourself to do the thing, can I notice the people around me who like, oh, wow, they're doing that. And this
yes.
is, right? So I agree with the Inside Out recommendation, because that also, yes, absolutely,
Yes.
is in that sort of sphere where it's just like healthy talk about all of this. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Wonderful. Okay, so we've got hopefully an episode that's a resource, and we've got some resources at the end. So thank you so much for your time, and it's so lovely always to talk to you.
Absolutely. It's been a blast.
This podcast is intended for educational purposes only and is completely separate from my clinical and research roles. However, it is an important part of my personal mission to bring free science-based information and tools to everyone.